Hey AP Econ students, welcome to video number 2 on fiscal policy. Starting off today with a picture of a set of triplets straight out of Barcelona, Spain. The goal here is obvious, figure out which one of these kids is you. Alright, getting into the packet. This is page 6 of the note packet if you downloaded that from Blackboard, which you should have yesterday. The goal today is to practice with discretionary and non-discretionary fiscal policy, which we need to define first. So we will be working through pages 6 to 12 in the note packet. So two types of fiscal policy, discretionary and non-discretionary. Discretionary is purposeful actions by Congress, and it requires some kind of legislative process. That is in contrast to non-discretionary, which is generally termed automatic or automatic stabilizers. So Congress can pass legislation that is designed to shift the aggregate demand curve through taxes and or government spending. So those are the two tools of discretionary fiscal policy: raising or lowering taxes and increasing or decreasing government spending. Non-discretionary fiscal policy, or automatic stabilizers, are structures that are already in place that will work to stabilize an economy as it heads either into recession or an inflationary gap. So it'll occur automatically without any purposeful legislative action. Examples of these, the ones that you see most frequently on the AP exam, will be progressive income taxes. Okay, so add that to your notes there. Progressive income taxes we covered earlier in the year, but as a refresher means as your income increases, you pay a greater percentage of your income in taxes. So if you're at the top bracket, you're paying 37.5% on, I don't know, roughly, let's say $200,000 or more. So as you make more money, you pay a greater percent in taxes. That acts as an automatic stabilizer because, for instance, when you go into recession, incomes will fall. And as incomes fall, people will pay lower percentage of their income in taxes. So it acts a bit like a tax cut. Other examples of automatic stabilizers are things like transfer payments, welfare, unemployment benefits. Again, more people during a recession will automatically qualify for these kinds of benefits, so they kick in really pretty quickly to alleviate some of the recessionary pressures. The discretionary takes some time, right? So there's a lag between recognizing what your economic condition is, actually enacting legislation, especially if you have any kind of split between the parties in the House and the Senate, and or between Congress and the President. So it's difficult for Congress and the President to act quickly in the current conditions, right? Some people are getting stimulus money this week, so they did a pretty good job turning that around. That is an example of discretionary fiscal policy because they're giving money directly to people, the goal of which is to hopefully see it funneled back into the economy in the form of increased consumer spending to help stabilize. We did this slide yesterday. Again, if the problem in your economy is inflation, you will look for contractionary fiscal policy, so cutting government spending and increasing taxes, or some combination of both. Again, that's when you're trying to close an inflationary gap. If you're trying to close a recessionary gap, which is what is currently going on, you're going to increase government spending and cut taxes, or use some combination of both. The government currently is doing both in an attempt to stimulate us out of a recession. Okay, I need you to pause the video now. We're in page 9 of the packet. Try these first before I go through them. Okay, so pause the video now, try them, and then we'll go through the answers. All right, while you were pausing, I sketched out a quick ADAS model to help us look at some of these problems. So we're going to take 5 scenarios and decide whether we need expansionary policy or contractionary policy, what we want to have happen to aggregate demand curve, what to do to taxes, government spending, and then the effect on the budget and the debt. So unemployment rate rises to 12%. That means you have a recessionary gap. You need to increase aggregate demand by either cutting taxes or increasing government spending, or both. The effect on the budget and debt. So we don't want to talk about a budget increasing or decreasing. We want to talk about a budget moving towards deficit or moving towards surplus. So if we assume that a budget is balanced to begin with, when you start expansionary fiscal policy such as this, you'll be moving your budget towards deficit, which will have the effect of increasing the national debt. You finance a deficit by borrowing. We went through that. If you haven't watched the first video, make sure you watch it because we did a section on budget. So it will increase the national debt as the government borrows to finance the increased spending and make up for lost tax revenue. All right, number 2 describes an inflationary gap. If we're staring at 14% inflation, the primary goal is going to have to be bring price levels down. So you're going to want to lower aggregate demand, raise taxes, cut government spending. The budget then would move towards surplus. You are taking in greater tax revenue while at the same time decreasing government spending. And in some kind of fantasy land, it would mean actually paying down some of the national debt. And on our model, guys, expansionary fiscal policy is a rightward shift of the aggregate demand curve. Contractionary fiscal policy is a leftward shift. Okay. All right. Lack of consumer confidence with weak retail sales and increasing business inventories. That describes a recessionary gap. And then, guys, this is really formulaic. We're going to follow the same pattern as in number 1. We want to increase aggregate demand, cut taxes, increase government spending, move towards deficit in our budget, and increase the national debt. Number 4 is an inflationary gap, right? So we are worried about inflation. Aggregate demand falls, or at least the goal for aggregate demand is to fall to lower price levels. To effectuate that goal, you're going to want to raise taxes, cut government spending. It would move your economy towards surplus and potentially lower the national debt. Okay, in your mind, you should be thinking of the term that number 5 describes. Inflation persists while unemployment stays high. High inflation and high unemployment is the condition of stagflation, which is caused by a negative supply shock. You got a problem now. If you are experiencing stagflation, which I'll sketch out here quickly, right? So short-run aggregate supply has shifted in. Maybe you have an oil shock. And you have a recessionary gap, but with high prices. If you raise aggregate demand by using expansionary fiscal policy, you will close the recessionary gap, but you'll make the inflation worse. So you'll help unemployment, but you'll hurt the inflation rate. If you use contractionary policy and move AD in, you'll break inflation, but you'll make unemployment worse. So the choice is yours. You could dig up Ronald Reagan, ask him how he dealt with it. But you're going to have to attack one before the other. The goal, of course, would be to get SRAS to move out. That is difficult to do using fiscal policy. Notice the only curve we will move when we're using fiscal policy is aggregate demand, not aggregate supply. Supply side economics is much harder in practice than it is in theory. It's easy to get people to spend, cut their taxes, hand them money. It's easier to get the government to spend because the government loves to spend. So infrastructure, roadworks, education, research, all of that. Getting supply side to move is a lot more difficult to do. And for our purposes, it's impossible to do using just fiscal policy, using just taxing and spending. All right, last practice, automatic versus discretionary policy, and then identifying whether the policy at issue is expansionary or contractionary. Again, pause the video and try these yourself before I go through the answers. All right, quickly let's look at this first part about discretionary versus automatic. Notice that I circled the action verb in all of the examples or scenarios that represent discretionary fiscal policy. Cuts, eliminates, launches, raises, gives. So when you see purposeful action on the government, those are all discretionary policies. Cutting taxes, getting rid of tax breaks, eliminating deductibility, launching a space program, raising taxes, all of those are discretionary. Everything else, guys, is automatic, and the term you see there is as a result. Incomes rise, as a result, people pay a larger fraction of their income tax. So that's the use of progressive income tax as an automatic stabilizer, injecting some stimulus automatically as incomes change. So again, if you have an action verb where the government's purposely doing something, then it is discretionary. If it automatically starts stabilizing the economy because people are qualifying for benefits or the incomes are falling, so they actually get a lower tax rate, then it is automatic. All right, if you haven't yet, pause the video and do the expansionary versus contractionary effect. All right, here we go. Cutting taxes is expansionary. Eliminating favorable tax treatment, guys, is going to be contractionary because essentially you're raising taxes. By eliminating favorability of long-term capital gains tax treatment, you're actually using contraction there. Incomes rise, people pay a greater share, that is contractionary. More families qualifying for food stamps is expansionary. Eliminating deductibility of interest expense is contractionary. Again, that has the effect of raising taxes. Major new space program is expansionary. New government spending, creating jobs, which will create more consumer spending. Raising taxes, contractionary. Collecting more corporate income tax because profits are up is contractionary. Raising taxes is contractionary. Giving government employees a pay raise is expansionary. Okay? So, right, anything that is injecting money into the economy via government spending or lower taxes will be expansionary. Anything that is pulling money out of the economy in the form of less government spending or more tax payments is contractionary. All right, so make sure you review those. Next video, we'll take up the next section and start getting into the multiplier effect. All right, have a good day, guys.